Now, we all know the best place to start a story is at the beginning, so let me take you back to where it all started. I was born in 1938 in Brooklyn. My mother's name was Mary, and my father's name was Jacob. That's all the information I have about him. That and the fact that he was a horrible man. Jacob was a horrible husband, and he never made any attempt to even be a father to me. My mother, Mary, told me that many times he had beaten her up for looking at him the wrong way. He said the way my mother stared at him made him nervous, and for that he would beat her. Sometimes it would be so terrible that he would lock her outside in the rain after beating her up, and in the mornings he would open the door with glee, hoping that my mother was dead. But to his surprise, every morning he would find her alive and well. Mary simply refused to die, and this enraged him so much. 2 years after being married to him and enduring endless miscarriages because of his brutality, Mary had her first child, me, Eloise Johnson. She told me that on the day I was born, when the midwife placed me in her arms for the first time, she lifted me towards the heavens, and she commanded God never to let her get pregnant for Jacob again. Now, it don't matter if you believe in God or not, but that day the heavens heard my mother, and she never got pregnant again. But then something even worse started to happen. Her wish was granted, but her inability to have any more children gave Jacob an actual reason to be cruel to her, and he made sure to use it. The beatings became more frequent and more brutal. Now, you must remember that in those days it was normal for men to hit their wives. There was never any outrage about it. It was just one of those things that women were supposed to bear to make a marriage work. One day when I was 6 years old or so, I remember vividly that I was helping my mother in the kitchen when my father walked in with a devilish smirk on his face. "Pack up your stuff and move to the outhouse. I've got a baby on the way," he said, laughing like he just told the funniest joke ever. Behind him was a young girl no more than 18 years old with a belly shooting out like a barrel. Jacob expected my mother to feel defeated and grovel, but instead she gave him a dead stare and said, "I'll make it easier for you." She went into the room, packed up all our things, put me in my Sunday dress, and told me we had to leave. As we walked out the door with everything we owned inside a little box, my father stood on the porch and laughed. "Where would you go?" he yelled, but my mother never looked back, not even to steal a glance. In those days, a woman leaving her husband was a death sentence. My mother was penniless, just like every other woman in Brooklyn. To survive, a woman had to be one of two things, either a wife or a daughter. From that day, she was neither. Jacob relished the thought that he might finally succeed at killing my mother, but yet again, Mary Johnson refused to die. That day, we walked for 5 hours from Brooklyn to Harlem. I will never forget the way my feet burned as we walked. I will never forget the way my mother continued to march forward, even as I cried and I yelled at her to stop. She was stone-faced as she held me in one hand and dragged the box containing all we had in the other hand. And my God, we walked forever. When we finally got to Harlem, my mother said a prayer and knocked on a random door. An elderly woman opened the door, and she had the kindest face I'd ever seen. She smiled at me, and I instantly forgot how badly my feet burned. She smiled at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I saw Mary Johnson cry. She let us come in, and my mother told her everything. After my mom finished speaking, she offered us a room my mother lived in until she finally let death take her. That woman became my Grandma Ann, the woman who raised me.